My name is Jo Franchetti, and I am a developer advocate at Samsung Internet with that one over there. And as a developer advocate, I don't know how many of you are sort of familiar with what we do, but my role is to make sure that you lot all know what Samsung Internet is and that you're all testing in it. It's a browser. We're the third most popular browser on your mobile phone. If you're not testing in it, you're probably missing a lot of your audience, so do that. But my other job is to keep you all up to date in new APIs that the browser is supporting, and conversely to that, find out from you what it is that you want from a browser and feed it back to our developers. So I spend a lot of time traveling and talking to developers. And I've been a front-end developer for about 7 years, and I've worked in many different sectors, from small startups to big organizations, from charities to agencies, from the civil service to attempting to be self-employed. Turned out I was really bad at that because I'm bad at asking people to actually pay me. And I'm also a coach and organizer at Code Bar, where we teach coding to underrepresented groups in tech. And what I'm trying to tell you with all of this is that I spend a lot of my time talking to developers and designers and their teams from all seniority levels and from many different walks of life. And I've started to notice some trends. Trends in behaviors, in beliefs, and in complaints amongst people who work in the tech industry. And to illustrate some of these, I'd like to tell you a story about a friend of mine. Let's call her Mo. And while I tell you about Mo, I'd like to see if you recognize any of her behaviors in yourself. So Mo is a web developer. She's got a few years' experience under her belt, and she works on a team with other developers in a medium-sized organization. Mo went to uni like her teachers told her that she should, but she feels like maybe she chose the wrong course. But at the time, she was too afraid to change because it was midway through. So instead, she graduated and decided to completely reskill once she'd finished, and she taught herself HTML and CSS with a view to becoming a web developer. But she's always had a bit of a niggling worry about her skills as a developer because she was self-taught. And sometimes she worries that she doesn't know the correct names or techniques for the code that she's writing. But she doesn't want to ask her colleagues for help in case she lets on about the things that she doesn't know. She's worried that they'll judge her, or worse, they'll fire her. She imagines the shock on their faces. You don't know that? That's so basic. Mo tries to keep up with technologies by reading tutorials and attending meetups and going to events. But sometimes she feels like everyone else is just getting the stuff that she finds that she struggles with. And there are people out there who are writing new and awesome frameworks and tools while she's still trying to learn the previous ones. And sometimes she feels a little bit like a fraud. She follows a lot of web celebrities on various social media platforms to help her stay up to date. And she's amazed at how the speakers at the events and the people that she follows on social media, how much they're able to get done. They're creative geniuses. They never have to ask for help. They never get stuck. Their days just seem to have more hours than hers do. And they've all got side projects on the go as well. Mo's got a few ideas for side projects, but she doesn't really know how to get started with any of them, and some of them she can't seem to finish. She's worried that people are going to judge her for being too unoriginal or too simple, so she never actually puts them in the public eye. She just keeps tweaking them indefinitely. And if she's really honest, sometimes she just doesn't want to face a side project. She's been sat at a computer all day at work. She doesn't want to sit at one when she gets home. And her worry about keeping up with everybody and not feeling good enough starts to bother her throughout her work day. Sometimes she's so worried that she can't concentrate on what she's doing, and then she worries that she's wasted time worrying. So she works longer hours and she takes shorter breaks, and she still hasn't asked for help because she doesn't want to give her secret away. In order to hide how worried she is about her own lack of knowledge, she starts attending more events and joining web-related organizations. And people often tell her that they don't know how she manages to fit it all in. But she smiles and shrugs off their comments because that means her cover is working. They'll never find out that she's a fraud. And Mo sometimes finds that when she gets home, she doesn't have the time or energy to deal with chores or even see her real friends. And her diet has become quite poor because she's eating so much pizza at these events. And she's drinking a lot more than she used to, but you know, it's a free bar. And even though she gets to bed late, she sometimes struggles to sleep at night because she can't seem to get her brain to switch off. It likes to switch between worrying about her workload and running lists of all the jobs that she needs to do around the house. And her ability at work her ability to concentrate at work continues to suffer. She procrastinates a lot instead of getting work done. She'll write emails, she'll check social media, anything to stop her from actually having to get down and start work. And then she panics because she thinks she's not done enough throughout the day. And her daily stand-up meetings become a dread every morning because she's worried that her team are going to ask her whether she's being productive enough. Maybe they're going to fire her. By the way, her team thinks she's doing fine. They only ever see the output of her extra hours of work and not the procrastination that comes before it. And Mo constantly looks to external sources to validate her choices. She never believes that she's good enough or is managed enough. She puts down her own work and instead lives for her next Twitter likes and her emails from her boss that tell her that the projects that she's working on have increased revenue. But she never sees any of that increased revenue herself because she's far too afraid to ever ask for a promotion. Promotions only happen to people who know what they're doing. One day at work, Mo gets an email from a colleague saying that she made a mistake in some work, and part of her just kind of snaps. And she runs to the bathroom because she knows she's going to start crying and she doesn't want anyone to see. She cries uncontrollably for an hour, and once she's done, she cleans up her face and goes back to her desk and pretends nothing happened. Everyone else can cope with their workload. They just tell her to buck up her ideas. Occasionally, Mo can't face going into the office, so she calls in sick on those days. But she never tells anyone that it's her mental health that's suffering and not her physical health. The only time that Mo ever feels like she can truly relax from work is when she's at the pub with her colleagues. They're not working either, so it must mean that she can stop thinking about work for an hour or so. The only problem being that her team have a tendency to binge drink. A lot. And one night, after drinking herself into oblivion, Mo gets on her bike and cycles home. She doesn't remember the journey. She doesn't remember most of the evening at all, if she's honest. But she does remember cycling into a railing outside her house and catapulting herself painfully across the road. Thankfully for Mo, a few days of concussion and some bruising and scratches were enough to make her realize that she needed to start facing her fears and her anxieties. She started therapy and she started learning about the causes of anxiety and stress. She started to learn that the mental health issues that she was facing, anxiety related to imposter syndrome and perfectionism, actually plague many people in the tech industry, but people don't often talk about them. And if you recognized any of Mo's behavior, I'd like to talk you through some of it now. As an aside, my DMs are always open. If you'd like to talk to me about your experiences as well, please do send me a message. So I'd like to give you a short introduction to the issues that Mo faced, along with some questions to ask yourself and some methods of recognition to help you notice if you're ever going through what she did. I truly believe that the tech industry is an amazing place to be, and the more we talk about these things, the more we can change the face of mental health in the tech industry and our own mental well-being. So let's get started. Firstly, imposter syndrome, which you might also have heard of called imposter phenomenon or imposter experience. Imposter syndrome describes the feeling that you haven't really earned your accomplishments, that by fraud or just dumb luck you've ended up in the same place as others and you don't feel worthy, you don't feel you deserve to be there. And to call it a syndrome actually downplays how universal this feeling is. It's not a disease and it's not an abnormality, and it isn't necessarily tied to depression or anxiety or self-esteem, but it is prevalent in highly skilled and highly intelligent people, just like the people who are attracted to the tech industry. So where do these feelings come from? People like yourself who are skilled and intelligent tend to think that your colleagues and peers are also skilled and intelligent. And this can sometimes cause you to judge yourself against others and to do so unfairly and harshly. This judgment can cause you to believe that you don't deserve the opportunities, the qualifications, and the accolades that you've earned, or that in some way the skills that you've gathered aren't worth as much as the skills of the people around you. This can also be coupled with a belief that any qualifications or accolades that you've earned somehow aren't worthwhile anymore, they aren't praiseworthy. Have you ever striven to achieve something only when you did to feel like it came too easy? Or that someone had made a mistake in giving it to you? Or that once you've got it, it isn't enough and you have to instantly start working towards the next thing? Imposter syndrome doesn't let you feel pride or joy in your achievements. Another problem with imposter syndrome is that our fears can be intensified by a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance. This is where we doubt ourselves in private, but we never voice our doubts. So we believe we're alone in thinking that way because nobody else talks about it either. And this can be especially exacerbated by things like social media, where people tend to only present their best achievements and their successes. People rarely purposefully publish their mistakes, or their doubts, or their own foibles. And it becomes really difficult to know, how our peers are feeling, or how difficult they find certain tasks, or how often they get stuck or have to ask for help. And we don't know whether or not they're doubting themselves either. This means that there's no way for us to dismiss the feeling that we're less capable than those around us. So with a view to sharing and showing how prevalent this issue is, I'd like to share with you some famous, incredible people who have also suffered imposter syndrome. Now, Maya Angelou, even after writing 11 books and winning many, many awards, felt like she hadn't really earned her accomplishments. For those of you who can't read that, it says, "I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find me out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out." Even the talented and seemingly confident Emma Watson feels like a fraud. It's almost like the better I do, the more my feeling of inadequacy actually increases, because I'm just going, any moment someone's going to find out I'm a total fraud, that I don't deserve any of what I've achieved. And if you can believe it, Albert Einstein also experienced imposter syndrome. He described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve as much attention as it received. I mean, come on. Talking with others about imposter syndrome is the best way to start recognizing your fears for what they are. They're normal, but they're immaterial, and they're certainly unfactual. And whenever I'm worrying about whether everyone around me knows more than me or whether or not I belong, I like to think of what I like to call Schrodinger's imposter syndrome. So this goes somewhere along the lines of this. Somehow I've convinced myself that all my peers are far more intelligent and accomplished than I am, and yet also they're so gullible and stupid that I have cleverly tricked them into believing that I deserve to be amongst them. Now, these two statements can't exist alongside each other and be true. My logic is fallible, and therefore likely so is my disbelief in myself. And you're going to have a brilliant talk by Sasha later on just proving to yourself how much you know and how much you have to give. We may never be able to banish imposter experience entirely, but we can have open and frank conversations with our peers, with our seniors, with our mentors and friends, and help to build confidence in some of the facts. You are talented, you are capable, and you belong here. So, secondly, I'd like to talk to you about perfectionism. When I was preparing for my first ever tech interview, I was given a very common piece of advice that I'm sure some of you have also been told at some point. If an interviewer ever asks you what your weaknesses are, just tell them you're a perfectionist. Now, this particular piece of advice was given to me and countless others by my boss in my job at the time. And it's the kind of statement that makes everybody roll their eyes. Like, interviewers and interviewees alike know that this is a cop-out answer. The view is that you're not really revealing any weakness because employers want to hire perfectionists. Perfectionists do great work, right? Perfectionists do the best work. They do perfect work. And it never occurred to me at the time, as I sort of naively accepted this older and more experienced man's instruction, that I'd learned to know the real truth behind this statement. So Wikipedia says that perfectionism in psychology is a personality trait characterized by a person striving for flawlessness, setting high performance standards, accompanied by critical self-evaluations and concerns regarding others' evaluations. Which, when you think about it, sounds great. If I were an employer, I'd want to hire someone who strives for flawlessness, who sets high standards, who cares about other people's evaluations. They sound like a real achiever. However, perfectionism can often be a blocker to achievement. Imagine if you're constantly striving for perfection. Not greatness, not excellence, actual perfection. You can't help but set yourself up to fail. Achieving perfection is just not something that happens often. And perfectionists measure our own self-worth by how able we are to achieve this perfection and by how much we can accomplish. And if accomplishments aren't achieved, we can be very harsh on ourselves. The trouble is that for perfectionists, Our performance is kind of intertwined with our sense of self. And if we don't succeed, we're not just disappointed, we feel shame about who we actually are. Imagine if you got a bad score in a test, and you tell yourself, I'm disappointed, but that's okay. I'm still a good person. That's healthy. If your message to yourself is, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough, that's perfectionism. Perfectionists often engage in something called catastrophic, or you might hear it called black and white thinking, where everything either becomes perfect or terrible. And even things that people would call great or good enough fall into the terrible category because they're not perfect. An example could be a fear of publishing a piece of work because you're worried that somebody might find an error in it. The idea of somebody finding an error becomes this end-of-world scenario rather than something manageable that they could work through once they get there. I was diagnosed as a perfectionist last year, and it was actually a relief to finally have a name to put to the stress that I was feeling. Every time I made a mistake or I had a mental block, I tended to spiral into this kind of depression and a decision paralysis, which made my mental block even worse and my disgust with myself greater. One time, the anxiety that I felt over being unable to do a perfect piece of work actually manifested itself into crippling neck pain, and doctors eventually had to put me on Valium to make me actually take a week off work. And the tech industry, capitalism, and our society as a whole love it when we strive for perfection. Build faster, better things, be the most successful, earn the most money, and then you can spend it on being even better. And tech employers will often encourage the idea, the unhealthy belief that we should be constantly striving to work harder, to create more, and to learn everything. The idea of needing to be successful and to turn a profit is drilled into us from such an early age. I mean, we have entrance exams to get into the right schools at 11 years old. And we're led to believe that we have to get the right job straight out of education, otherwise, our career is going to be ruined. And perfectionist employees often pressure themselves into tiredness, depression, paralysis, and even burnout, all while probably continuing to turn in great work, but never daring to ask for help, because that would be admitting that they can't be perfect. And much like those with imposter syndrome, perfectionists will often disregard their own accomplishments because they're not enough. As soon as they get something that they were working towards, it's instantly disregarded because that feeling of perfection that is impossible to achieve is never felt. So they instantly start working towards the next thing and the next thing. And it's an unsustainable and unhappy way to be, and can very quickly lead to overwork and to burnout. So if you're not sure whether you've ever had perfectionist tendencies, I'd like to ask you a few questions to consider. Firstly, and the one that got me, would you consider yourself a perfectionist? Now, if you answered as I did, something along the lines of, oh no, there's no way I'm good enough to be a perfectionist, then I've got news for you. Have you ever felt like you can't start a project because you can't decide how to start? Sometimes figuring out the perfect way to start is an actual blocker to even getting started. Have you ever left a project unfinished because you couldn't get it exactly how you wanted it? The project feels not quite perfect yet, so you keep adding bits and you keep tweaking bits, and you're still not ready to actually show it to anybody or to ask anybody's opinion on it yet. Have you ever worried about a project and put it off and delayed until the last second, right up until the deadline when you've finally been forced to actually do some work and to output something, and then felt surprised and maybe a little bit silly about how it was all fine in the end, and how everybody actually thought your work was great? Have you ever felt afraid or ashamed about asking help from a colleague or a peer? Because maybe that will show that you don't know something and that you can't manage something, and perfect people can manage and know everything. Better to just try that millionth Google search than to turn to your colleague. Have you ever found yourself repeatedly scrolling through social media or watching reruns on Netflix or even tidying your house when you know that you should be doing something else? Now, there are two sides to this question. As I mentioned before, perfectionists tend to procrastinate when they don't know how to start or finish a project. Not working on the project means that it can't ever be a failure because it will never be finished. The other side to that is that perfectionists, and to be honest, capitalism as well, wants us to be constantly working and improving. When we're not working, maybe we feel like we should be. That by allowing ourselves downtime, we're actually being lazy. This is the kind of feeling that makes us check our work emails at midnight, or be constantly present on work Slack. Now, maybe you want to prove your dedication, or you want to one-up your colleagues, or for whatever reason, that kind of behavior needs to be kept in check. You need to allow yourself real downtime, time when you're not thinking about work and when you're not feeling guilty about not working. So what can we do both as perfectionists and friends of perfectionists to make the tech industry a safer, kinder place to work? So as I said earlier, allow yourself time. Sometimes you just can't tackle a problem. It doesn't mean that you'll never be able to tackle it, it just means you can't do right now. Give yourself some time out and don't let feelings of guilt or shame take over. Take a half-an-hour walk or a whole day or two away from the problem, but schedule in a start time for when you're going to try again in the future. Set deadlines, goals, targets, and schedules that are realistic. Either set them for yourself or get someone to help you set them. Too much freedom can often be stifling to perfectionists. We need something to aim for and something to improve upon. Given a blank canvas, we'll panic or we'll procrastinate, or we'll start and finish multiple projects. Setting achievable goals will allow striving for excellence while removing the paralyzing nature of an open-ended task. And tell somebody about the goals that you've set. When you tell somebody about it, it makes you feel more concrete about it. It's much easier to renge on a promise to yourself than it is on a promise that you've made that other people know about. And remember that perfect is the enemy of great. Perfectionism isn't about high standards, it's about unrealistic standards. How many projects have you thrown away because they weren't perfect? How many times have you struggled for hours on a problem because you were too afraid to ask for help? Getting something out is better than abandoning your hard work. And you'll probably be surprised that not only will nobody else notice these imperfections that you're seeing, but they'll think that your work is great. Acknowledge that you are your own most harsh critic. Most people don't expect perfection. Only perfectionists think that they do. No one is going to judge you as harshly as you judge yourself. It's okay to make mistakes, everybody does. It's even okay to release imperfect code. And it's okay if somebody calls you up on a mistake that you made. Thank them, learn from it, and you'll both move on with your lives. The world will not end. Consider how you'd react if somebody said the things that you're thinking about yourself to one of your friends. And think your fears through to their logical conclusion. Instead of the catastrophic black and white thinking, like if I made a mistake in front of my colleagues, then that will be the end of everything, consider what the end of everything actually looks like. Consider the worst possible outcome of your fear, and then be honest with yourself about how likely that scenario actually is. Then you can start to consider how an event would actually play out and how bad or not it would actually be. Teaching yourself to do these things can save you hours of worrying. The more I've spoken about my experiences with perfectionism, the more people have told me about their similar experiences. With the tendency for intelligence and achievement in the tech industry, it's perhaps unsurprising that so many people suffer from imposter syndrome and perfectionism. The more we talk about it, the less we'll feel stigma around it. If you're a mentor, consider asking your mentees what they worry about outside of a technology curriculum. If you have a mentor, consider asking them whether they ever felt imposter syndrome or if they've had problems starting or finishing projects. If you've not got a mentor, consider getting one. Talk to your managers if you're worried about how you're managing your time, and don't be afraid to ask for help. If you don't feel comfortable talking to your colleagues about it, talk to your friends or talk to me. I'm always happy to chat, and I'm on Slack, the Codebar Slack or Twitter, or I'm always happy to grab a coffee with anybody. Everybody goes through rough periods. We don't have to downplay it. We can validate our own and each other's experiences. It's okay to say, yeah, this is hard sometimes. The more open and communicative we are about mental health, the more pleasant we can make the tech industry for everyone. And the final issue I'd like to talk to you about, and that I'd like you to watch out for yourselves, is anxiety. Now, anxiety is a natural and normal feeling. Worrying about a new experience or a deadline or a scary situation is understandable. However, anxiety becomes a problem if you're feeling it all the time, or if you're feeling it for a long period of time. Now, we learn anxiety as babies. When we're tiny and helpless, we rely entirely on somebody thinking that we're lovable enough to give us everything that we need. But for some of us, that need to feel loved and to feel accepted and to feel worthy stays with us for the rest of our lives, and we need assurance that we're doing okay. And in the last few years, we've been given some powerful tools for checking how we're doing in comparison to everybody else. Instagram, I'm looking at you. And these tools are a great way to get instant validations on our decisions and our life choices. Posting on social media gives us a means of presenting the lives that we want our lives to be and getting validation in the forms of likes and comments. But we can't help comparing the actuality of our lives with the beautiful, idealized illustrations that other people have put out there, which can constantly stoke our fear that we're doing less well than others. Now, anxiety has many symptoms to look out for: increased heart rate, heart palpitations, fast breathing, feeling a tightness or a weight on your chest, and finding it difficult to fall asleep or to stay asleep. None of which we want to have to deal with on a regular basis. And both imposter syndrome and perfectionism can be causes of anxiety and can impact on your mental well-being. Record numbers of people are experiencing poor mental health, according to the World Health Organization. And a good prediction of depression is self-criticism, which perfectionists and those with imposter syndrome are very, very good at. Worsening matters, being self-critical not only leads to depressive symptoms, but those symptoms then make the self-criticism worse, and it's a horrible loop. And it's also been shown that one of the best protections against anxiety and depression is self-compassion, which is something that perfectionists are not very good at. So how can we improve our self-compassion and self-care? Because truly it does take practice and it takes patience. So firstly, we want to change where we look for validation. We're used to the ideas of external signs of success. We're trained into it from when we're very young. Our parents and our teachers and our grades tell us that we're doing okay. And sometimes we move on to a job or a career and we start feeling the need for that same validation, but we can find it less readily. So we start looking to unhealthy sources for indications about whether or not we're succeeding. We want our bosses to tell us we've done a good job. We want to be on the highest possible salary we can. We crave that next Twitter or Instagram like. And the problem with external validation is that it's fleeting. 1 or 2 likes on social media can feel good, and sure, a pay rise can feel great, but soon that feeling wears off and we're back to feeling insecure. Self-validation is the idea that you accept your own internal experience, your thoughts and your feelings. And it's knowing within yourself that you're good enough and that your experiences are worthy. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree with or feel good about every single thought and experience that you have. You'll still have thoughts and feelings that you know aren't justified, but accepting them allows you to calm yourself and to manage your emotions more effectively. So how can we learn to self-validate? Firstly, instead of resolving to instantly change your behavior, first learn to recognize it. If you find yourself engaging in negative thoughts about yourself, or procrastination, or checking your work Slack too often, or whatever behavior you're concerned about, acknowledge it and consider it. Once you've reached a point where you can notice that you're engaging in a bad habit, then you can start to consider reasoning with yourself over it and reflect on why you're doing it. If you're feeling insecure, consider whether it's really a societal pressure whether it's really coming from you or whether it's a societal pressure that's making you feel that way. If you find yourself procrastinating, let yourself have the time and then schedule in some start time. If you're checking your work email at night, sure, check it, then turn your phone off and put it down. Don't berate yourself for it, just acknowledge it, accept that it happened, reflect on it, and move on. And consider what might be behind the issue. If you have trouble getting to sleep at night, it might be because you've not spent enough time reflecting on the day and all your experiences. You know that time when your brain does that, oh, remember all the embarrassing things that you've done in your life? And you're just like lying there sweating? You can avoid that by spending some downtime either before bed or whenever is best for you, just thinking about your day and how it went and how you feel about it. Consider only the facts and try not to make assumptions. I got such and such done today and I feel good about it. Great. I didn't do X and I'm worried about that. Okay. My friend cancelled on me for lunch and I'm angry. Fine. These are all valid. I'm a failure and I'm no good at anything is an assumption and not a fact. If you catch yourself doing that, try and consider where that thought has come from. Are you being driven by a need for perfection? Are you believing the stories of capitalism, or dare I say it, the patriarchy? Stating the facts of your experience will help you to build trust in your own internal validation, and that will help you catch the bad habits quicker. Put management methods in place for your procrastination. Consider using apps like the Pomodoro technique that can help you set time for when you're working and when you're not. If you're applying for jobs, don't be afraid to ask probing questions about how they support their employees to have good mental health. Schedule in work hours and rest hours. That way you can't make yourself feel guilt over when you're working and when you're not. And allow your friends to help you through catastrophic thinking. The number of times that I've had a friend just say, "And then what?" when I've described my panic scenario, and I've gone, "Oh, yeah, well then it'll probably be okay." Sometimes you just need that extra nudge to remember that it's not the end of days. And finally, get in touch with what helps to keep you calm when you're feeling anxious or tired or just in need of a little me time. And for some people, that's a walk around the block. For some people, it's taking a bubble bath, listening to music, getting a bubble tea. But it has to be able to come from you and not from somebody else. These should be things that reduce your blood pressure and not raise it. Posting to Twitter doesn't count. Texting your crush doesn't count. Eating a kilo of chocolate doesn't count. And you've got a brilliant talk coming up on self-care later this afternoon from Taylor, which I'm sure will tell you much more. So I'm going to leave you with this. Self-soothing is the things that you can do for yourself to give yourself time to feel validated and happy. And why am I telling you all these things? Because I never want anybody else to go through what I did or to feel alone or unsupported. Because I really think that by talking about it, we can increase awareness and learning about mental health in the tech industry. Because you deserve to feel happy and comfortable. And as evidenced by the brilliant lineup that you've got coming today, the tech industry can be wonderful, it can be empowering, and it can be a brilliant place to be. And you deserve to be there. Thank you.